But it didn't reflect public opinion on the issue. Despite much sympathy for cases like Bentley and Ellis, there was still widespread support for capital punishment.
And in polls in the 1960s, people said the one thing about the whole of the 1960s that they disliked most was the abolition of the death penalty. So what you have, effectively, is an elite-driven, kind of liberal establishment project to reform the death penalty. Now that comes from, I guess, education and from a different moral outlook and whatnot, but it also rests on something that we just simply don't have today, which is a sense that the people in Parliament know better. They know best, and they are not dependent on the kind of popular will, if you like, on popular opinion for their mandate. So, in a funny way, the abolition of the death penalty would be impossible in today's Parliament. It's something that was only possible in the 50s and 60s because they didn't have that kind of populist political culture that we have today.
Despite Parliament's ruling, the debate over capital punishment continued to rage throughout the 1960s.
And they were expecting that if you could abolish it at Parliament, that you could also bring it back through Parliament. So naturally enough, any high-profile case, especially one which might, as it were, lead to at least bringing it back partially, say for the murder of policemen, or for a particularly violent set of murders, these were leapt on by newspapers in order to try and reverse the decision.
In October 1965, less than a year after abolition, the resolve of Parliament would be tested by one of the most notorious murder cases of the 20th century.
We think of the mid-60s as this great utopian, happy-go-lucky, kind of orgiastic age where everyone's having a great time. In fact, the mid-60s was a much more anxious, darker time than we remember.
In what would become known as the Moors murders, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley kidnapped, tortured and killed 5 children, burying them in shallow graves on Saddleworth Moor.
On these bleak and desolate moorlands, 1,600 feet up in the Pennines, senior police officers believe they'll find 2 more bodies, possibly a third.
It's impossible to overstate how shocking those crimes were, particularly when the tapes were played in court and then reported in the newspapers.
At their trial, there was public outrage when a tape recording was played to the court of Brady and Hindley torturing 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey.
And that means that within a year of the suspension of the death penalty, you have newspaper columnists, and particularly kind of, people in the pub, people on street corners and whatnot, calling for the death penalty to be brought back, because there are kind of 2 people who to people in the 1960s seem ideal candidates for the hangman's noose. It's Brady and Hindley.
The overwhelming majority wanted to see Brady and Hindley hang for their crimes. But public pressure could not convince the government. Brady and Hindley were both sentenced to life imprisonment. A life sentence for murder